What would you do if your boss handed your project to someone else in front of your entire department and told everyone it was never yours to begin with? I still think about that Thursday afternoon. The conference room on the 14th floor, 31 people sitting around the table and standing along the walls, the projector throwing blue light across my director's face as he said the words that ended 4 years of my working life at that company. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Nathan. I spent 11 years in hotel operations management, the last 4 at a mid-size hospitality group headquartered in Atlanta. We ran 8 properties across the Southeast Conference hotels, airport properties, 1 boutique downtown that punched above its weight. My job was guest experience strategy. Essentially, I was the person responsible for figuring out why guests left happy or didn't, and building systems to push that number in the right direction. I was good at it. Not in the way people say they're good at things to make themselves feel better. I mean, the numbers backed it up. When I joined, our average post-stay satisfaction score across the portfolio was 74. By year 3, I had it at 88. The industry benchmark for our tier was 81. My director, a man named Howard, used to bring that number up in every quarterly call with ownership like it was something he'd personally invented. He hadn't, but I didn't say that. I kept my head down and kept working. The thing that eventually got me in trouble wasn't my performance. It was a system I built in year 2 called the threshold log. It sounds simple because the idea itself was simple. Every front desk manager, every housekeeping supervisor, every food and beverage lead, anyone with guest-facing responsibility, kept a daily record of the moment a guest interaction crossed a threshold. Not complaints, not compliments. Thresholds. The exact second something shifted, good or bad, and what the staff member did in that moment. I started reading those logs every morning. All of them, across all 8 properties. I cross-referenced them with post-stay surveys, with rebooking rates, with online review patterns. What I found was that about 60% of our 5-star reviews traced back to a specific category of threshold moment. The moment a staff member acknowledged something personal about a guest's situation without being asked to. Not a discount, not a biscount, not a free upgrade. Just recognition. A housekeeper who left a handwritten note when she noticed from a guest's luggage tag that it was his birthday. A front desk agent who remembered a couple had gotten engaged at our downtown property the year before and left a small card in their room when they returned. A bellman who overheard a guest mention a delayed flight and proactively called a local restaurant to hold their reservation an extra 40 minutes. These weren't policy. These were individual choices made by individual people. I started documenting them, sharing them at staff meetings, building a recognition program around them. I called it the Threshold Moment Award. Every month, 1 staff member from across the portfolio got recognized company-wide, a small cash bonus, a framed certificate, and most importantly, their specific story shared with everyone else as a teaching example. Within 18 months, our rebooking rate climbed from 34% to 51%. That's not a rounding error. That's the difference between a hotel that survives and a hotel that grows. Howard presented those numbers to ownership. He did not mention the threshold log. He did not mention the award program. He referred to it as a portfolio-wide service culture initiative driven by departmental leadership. I was departmental leadership. I let it go. The problem started when one of the property general managers, a woman I'll call my GM friend, she ran our Savannah property, started telling her peers at an industry conference about the threshold log specifically. She wasn't trying to cause trouble. She was proud of it. She thought it was worth sharing. She gave credit where it was due and used my name. Word got back to Howard. He called me into his office on a Monday and said, and I remember this precisely because I wrote it down afterward, "Nathan, I need you to be a team player here. When we share methodology externally, it needs to come through the proper channels. You can't have individual contributors running around talking to competitors about our internal systems." I told him I hadn't said anything to anyone. He said he knew that, but that I needed to manage my relationships better. I didn't fully understand what he meant, and I think that was intentional. 2 weeks later, he announced a new initiative called the Guest Connection Framework. It had a new name, a new logo, a slide deck with his name in the footer. The core methodology was the threshold log. I'm not being paranoid. I have the original documentation I created, time-stamped, saved to my personal drive before any of this happened. He had restructured the language, changed some of the terminology, added a few layers of corporate-sounding process around it, but the engine was mine. I didn't say anything. What was I going to say? To whom? HR. HR reported to the same VP Howard did. I started keeping records instead. Here's where the pacing of my own story slowed down considerably, because the next 8 months were just grinding. Head down, do the work, watch someone else get credit, smile in the meetings, leave the building, and sit in my car for 10 minutes before I could drive home. My wife could tell something was off. I told her it was fine. It was not fine. The conference room on the 14th floor. That Thursday, Howard had called an all-hands for what he described as a strategic realignment presentation. 31 people in the room plus me. He stood at the front with the projector and walked through a restructuring of the guest experience function. New titles, new reporting lines, new geographic clusters, and then he got to the slide that had my name on it. He said the threshold log, he called it the Guest Connection Framework. His name for it had been piloted successfully and was now being transitioned to a centralized team under a new senior director he was bringing in from outside the company. He said this new person would take the methodology to the next level and bring the kind of scalable thinking the framework needed to grow. He said it all without looking at me. Someone in the room asked about my role in the transition. Howard said I would be available to consult during the handover period and then refocused on day-to-day operational metrics. 11 years of experience, 4 years of documented results, and I was being handed a clipboard while someone else was handed my work. I didn't say anything in that room. I looked at my hands for a moment, then I looked up, found a spot on the wall behind Howard's head, and I kept my face completely still. I had learned, in the 8 months since the Guest Connection Framework was announced with his name on it, that any visible reaction was information I couldn't afford to give away. After the meeting, my GM friend from Savannah texted me, "Are you okay?" That was not right. I texted back, "I'm fine. Give me a few weeks." I meant it. Here's the thing about building something that actually works: people notice. Not in the loud, official way that gets you credit in a PowerPoint. In the quiet way that gets you a phone call. About 3 weeks after that Thursday, I got an email from a woman named Patricia. She was the VP of operations for a regional hospitality group based out of Charlotte. 11 properties, growing fast, recently acquired 2 more in the Carolinas. She said she'd heard about some of the guest retention work being done at our portfolio through a mutual contact. She didn't name the contact. She asked if I'd be open to a conversation. I said yes. We talked for 45 minutes on a Tuesday evening. I walked her through the actual methodology, not Howard's repackaged version, but the real thing, from the beginning. The observation that started it. The first property where I tested it. The data I had collected. She asked good questions. Specific questions. The kind that tell you someone has done their homework. At the end of the call, she said, "I'm going to be direct with you. We're creating a VP of Guest Experience position. It's new. We've never had this role because we've never been big enough to need it. We're big enough now. I think you might be exactly what we're looking for." I drove to work the next morning and looked at the building from the parking lot for a minute longer than usual. Patricia and I had 3 more conversations over the following 2 weeks. She included her CEO on the 3rd one. By the end of that call, the number on the table was a $118,000 base plus a performance bonus structure tied to portfolio-wide satisfaction metrics, the exact kind of measurement I had spent 4 years developing the tools to move. At my current company, I was making $79,000. I want to be careful here, because when people tell this kind of story, they sometimes make themselves sound like a genius who saw everything coming. I didn't. I was tired. I was frustrated in a way that had started affecting my sleep. I second-guessed myself constantly. Maybe Howard's restructuring made operational sense. Maybe the new senior director really would take it further. Maybe I was too close to the work to see it clearly. The self-doubt was real. It's always real when someone with authority tells you, even implicitly, that what you built isn't yours anymore. But here's what cut through all of that: the documentation. I had the original threshold log concept document, dated 14 months before Howard's Guest Connection Framework slide deck. I had the email chain where I proposed the Threshold Moment Award to Howard, and he approved it. I had the property-by-property data I had compiled, the satisfaction trend lines, the rebooking rate analysis. All of it. I had kept copies outside the company system from the beginning, not because I suspected this would happen, but because I'm the kind of person who keeps his own records. My wife used to tease me about it. I still have my college syllabi. When I prepared for my final conversation with Patricia's team, I walked them through all of it. Not as evidence in an argument, just as context. This is the work, this is the timeline, this is the data. Here's where it started, and here's where it went. Her CEO said, "I have to ask, does your current employer have any claim on this methodology?" I told him I have reviewed my employment agreement. The threshold log was conceptualized before I joined the company, documented before I was assigned to guest experience strategy, and the foundational concept predated my employment contract by 3 weeks. I had talked to an employment attorney friend of mine. We were clean. He nodded slowly. He said, "Good." I gave notice on a Wednesday morning. I asked to meet with Howard privately first. He agreed, probably expecting a conversation about the transition or maybe a push for a counteroffer. I told him I was resigning, effective in 2 weeks. I thanked him for the time at the company. I meant the thanks sincerely. I had learned things there even from watching how not to lead. You look surprised. Then he asked if this was about the restructuring. I said, "I just think it's the right time for me to take a new direction." He said he hoped I wasn't making an emotional decision. I told him I wasn't. And I meant that too. My last day, I walked out of that building carrying a box with a framed photo of my kids, a coffee mug, and a copy of a book I'd left on my desk for 2 years. One of my team members, a young woman who had been with me since her first week in hospitality, walked me to the elevator. She said, "I'm going to use the threshold log forever. I don't care what they call it." I told her I was glad. I told her to keep paying attention to the moment things shift. The elevator doors closed. My first week at the new company, I sat across from Patricia in her office in Charlotte, and she said, "Okay, tell me what you need to actually build this the right way." Nobody had ever asked me that question before. Not like that. I thought about it for a second. Then I told her. The first thing I asked for was time. Not a deadline to have a framework built in 90 days. Not a deliverable for the next board meeting. Just time to actually go to each of the 11 properties and sit with the people doing the work. Walk the floors. Eat in the staff cafeteria. Ask the housekeeper who's been there 16 years what she's noticed about the guests on the weekends versus the weekdays. She will tell you things no survey will ever capture. Patricia said, "Take the time you need. Do it right." I did. Within 8 months of building out the guest experience function, our portfolio satisfaction scores had climbed from a baseline of 76 to 84. Our rebooking rate, the one I care about more than any other number, moved from 29% to 44% across the portfolio. The 2 new properties we had acquired, both of which had come in with historically low scores, both cracked 80 within 6 months of the threshold log being implemented at the property level. A trade publication did a short feature on our rebooking rate growth. They interviewed Patricia. She told them it was driven by the VP of Guest Experience and the methodology he'd brought with him. She said my name. I've thought a lot about Howard since then. Not with anger, that's mostly gone. I think he genuinely believed that managing the messaging around successful work was just smart leadership. That wrapping someone else's idea in your own language and presenting it upward was how you climbed. Maybe in some organizations it is. Maybe he learned that lesson somewhere and it served him for a long time. But here's what I think he didn't understand. The methodology wasn't valuable because of the name on the slide deck. It was valuable because it was true. It was built on observation, on actual human behavior, on thousands of small moments tracked and studied and learned from. You can put your name on that. You can rename it and repackage it and present it at an all-hands in front of 31 people, but you cannot transfer the understanding that built it. That understanding went with me when I walked out. My wife asked me the night I told her about the new offer. She'd known something was happening. She always does. She asked me if I was sure. I told her about the number. I told her about the conversation with Patricia's CEO. I told her about the question he asked, whether the methodology was mine, and the answer I was able to give. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You've been keeping those files for 4 years." I said yes. She laughed. She said, "I always thought you were just being paranoid." Maybe I was. Or maybe 4 years of paying attention to the exact moment things shift had turned into a habit that extended beyond work. Either way, I knew what I had built. I knew what it was worth. And when someone finally asked the right questions and offered the right number, I was ready. Sometimes that's all the revenge you need. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened in that conference room. Not just what Howard did, but why I was able to walk away from it with something better waiting on the other side. The honest answer is that none of it was luck, and none of it was about being smarter than him either. Howard was smart. He knew how organizations work, how credit flows upward, how to frame someone else's results as collective leadership. He had probably been doing it for 20 years, and it had served him well. I don't think he ever lost a night of sleep over it. But there's a kind of intelligence that's different from knowing how to climb. It's the intelligence of paying attention to what's actually true, not what looks good in a presentation, not what the slide deck says, but what's real, what works, what the housekeeper with 16 years of experience actually notices about guests on a Sunday versus a Monday. That kind of attention is slow and unglamorous, and you can't put a logo on it. But it compounds over time in a way that shortcuts don't. I built the threshold log because I was genuinely curious. Not to impress anyone. Not to get promoted. I wanted to understand why some guest interactions turned into 5-year relationships and others turned into 1-star reviews. That curiosity was mine. Howard could rename the methodology and put his name in the footer of the slide deck, but he couldn't take the 4 years of observation that built it. That went with me when I left. And Patricia could see the difference immediately. When she asked me to walk her through the work, she wasn't listening for the right buzzwords. She was listening for whether I actually understood what I had built. There's a quality to that kind of conversation you can feel when someone knows a thing versus when they've learned to describe it. She knew. That's why she asked the question she asked, and that's why my answer mattered. The part I keep coming back to is the documentation. My wife laughed when I told her, "I always thought you were just being paranoid." Maybe. But I think what I was really doing, without fully realizing it, was trusting that the truth would eventually need to be verified, not as a legal strategy, just as a habit of honesty. Keep the receipts, date the files, know what's yours, and be able to show your work. That habit didn't come from cynicism. It came from the same place as the threshold log itself, from believing that the real things, the actual documented things, matter more than the version of events that gets presented in a conference room. Howard spent years learning how to manage perception. I spent years learning how to build something worth perceiving. In the end, the market sorted it out. Not dramatically, not with any great public reckoning. Just quietly, the way most things that matter actually happen. Someone asked the right questions. I had the right answers. A number landed on the table, and it reflected, for the first time in 4 years, what the work was actually worth. I think about the young woman who walked me to the elevator on my last day. She said she'd used the threshold log forever, whatever they called it. I think about that more than I think about Howard. That's the version of the story that stays with me. Not the conference room, not the restructuring slide, not the director who couldn't look at me when he gave my work away. Just her, and what she said, and the fact that the thing I built was real enough that someone who understood it wanted to carry it forward. That's what integrity actually produces, if you're patient enough to let it. Not a dramatic moment of vindication, just a quiet confirmation, usually when you least expect it, that you were right to do the work the right way.